$1 anyway, no matter what.
Witachi
It's
Brasileiro,
true.
Witachi wa .NET API review, and I am sorry if my Polish was terrible. So yeah, we're back to having screens and screens of proposals. So good work, everybody, and I don't know, keep them coming in. At some point, you might force us to do this meeting twice a week again. I mean, we're doing it like twice a week right now, but that's for one-offs, not like recurring. All right, words. Add pipe reader and writer overloads to JSON serializer, serialize stuff 68586. Wow, that's a low number.
Can you search for my name? And I think there was already notes in there from last time.
You're right, but I like how that's a low number in our repo.
I
We're
mean,
in the mere high 68,000 here.
we're in the 90,000 range now, so
I know.
that's like 2/3 of our range.
All right, so basically there's like three things that we talked about last time, right? So for me, like the problem isn't the API here. I think the API looks very reasonable. Like I don't have a lot of feedback on the API shape yet. It's just the layering itself that is the interesting tidbit here, right? So the conversation basically means system.io pipelines right now is a NuGet package that exists as an OOP component. My understanding is that it's already part of the ASP.NET shared framework. System.text.json is part of the base shared framework. So basically, the work that's required here is just taking this thing and moving it one layer down, which to me seems fine because it's basically a NuGet package anyways. It remains a NuGet package. You can still safely update your NuGet package to a higher version. You can lift yourself off of the one that ships in box if you desire to do that. So it's the same semantic as all the other OOP packages that we have that also happen to be in the shared framework. So that part is I think reasonably uncontroversial. I think the question now becomes is like, okay, how do we see pipelines in general moving forward? So one of the questions was like, should it be as low as stream because that would be harder to do? And I think the takeaway that I got from people was like, well, maybe that's where we're heading, but we don't need it yet. So just moving this thing one layer down seems fine. And then, of course, the implication is that system.text.json will have to take a dependency on system.io pipelines in order to offer those APIs, right? We discussed the alternative, which would be we build another package that depends on both system.text.json and IO pipelines. But we don't like that because in order to really do that usefully, we would have to have that third package kind of like have an IVT effectively to system.text.json in order to really do it efficiently, which I don't think anybody thinks is a better idea than just adding the dependency. So I think that's kind of where we are. Now, of course, when we do that, the other concern that was brought up is like, well, the pipeline path that we would use is different from the pipeline path that ASP.NET has been using so far. And so that would basically require us to do some additional fuzzing which we haven't done. So that's just work we would have to absorb. And I think last time, I don't know who said it, but I think there was this understanding that if we were to okay that the fuzzing work would fall to the ASP.NET team, which basically means your team would have to fund the work to do that. But when I repeated that last time, somebody pushed back on that. So I'm kind of curious where we are with this one now. Eric, do you remember?
Hey, say again.
So the question is with fuzzing. So who would do the fuzzing work? Would it be us or would it be ASP.NET?
So I think some kind of combined effort we're looking at. So effectively finding the old fuzzing repo that was using sharpfuzz to, fuzz the existing serialization implementation, and then retargeting that using the same corpus so that it exercises the pipelines APIs. But I think the most interesting dimension in this question is not necessarily the randomization of the data. It's mostly the randomization of the segmentation, as in, how the pipe reader actually serves the different chunks of data and how this segmentation might result in new functional bugs being discovered. I'm not sure we could necessarily achieve that with fuzzing. It might need some different kind of test harness that randomizes the segmentation of the read-only sequences.
Is that really challenging? I mean, it seems like that's something someone could throw together in like 10 minutes.
No, it's just part of the acceptance criteria, in my view.
Okay.
But I'm saying we should do both fuzz the implementation and do that aforementioned test harness.
Yeah, I think that's to do with the PR to get this merged. From an API review perspective, I don't think it's relevant.
Yeah.
And for the layering discussion, I think we need to agree to as much as is necessary for these APIs, which is, as Emo said, just moving the package from one shared framework to the other. There's no reason to put these types into corelib right now, which would bring additional complications on a variety of fronts. We move it down, system text JSON takes a dependency on it. Doesn't really change anything to do with NuGet packages. It just changes where the DLL lives on most people's disks. I think it's fine.
What's your comment regarding experimental emo?
So last time one of the things was discussed is like, if we're not sure about the layering, we could just mark it as experimental. And I said that's probably not helping us much because it's really not about the APIs that are experimental. It's more about the layering. And so that one we don't really have a good answer for. But I think if we're all in agreement that the layering is okay, then I don't think we need any of that anyways.
All in favor?
So system-level pipelines already supports net standard 2, right? So that's easy. We will just the only thing is like people like our friends in Azure would take a dependency. I mean, they already take a dependency of system text.json to just get additional NuGet package in the graph, but I think we can live with that.
When's the last time pipelines changed?
For a trimmed app, it shouldn't even affect size because unless you use the new API that takes a dependency on this, the whole DLL should go away too. So I think it's a no op.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that would depend on how the implementation looks like, right? I don't know whether we have to make changes in the core serialization path that might be harder to split, but that's not the case.
Are these going to be 8.0 only APIs, or do we expect down level to work as well?
I mean, in general, with system text JSON, the default is it goes everywhere unless there's a really good reason to do the extra work to keep it separate. And I don't think there's any reason to keep this separate. So I would say we just add it and the right things happen, which includes it's part of the net standard 2.0 package and ref.
I think what Eric was saying is that we could consider making that net
9.0
core only so that the dependency doesn't show up when you use it from framework, right? Which is because basically in the context of net core app, it would basically be free because it's already the shared framework. It would just be a NuGet dependency on down level, right? But I don't think we care enough to exclude it there.
Yeah, I wouldn't exclude it from that. That seems to be more work.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more work, and we generally don't like these fragmented API surfaces that it's just harder to reason about.
Right.
Okay. It just means new dependency comes in for down level people.
Yep.
Okay.
So the only other question that I have is, I mean, yes, we have to move pipelines to the shared framework that is lower, but I don't know where within that shared framework that sits layering wise. Presumably it's low enough. So because I would assume that we would have other things like Quick or other components eventually want to take a dependency on PipeReader as well. So it doesn't have to be as low as Stream, but would have to be low enough that we can do these things without, monumental work. But I assume that's already the case.
Yeah, it has no dependencies except for system memory. It should be in that sense of layering where it has no dependencies except for that thing. There's no way to
system
kind of
memory
force
is a NuGet only thing, right? Like in net core app, that's all stuff that is in corelib.
Corelib, exactly, yeah.
Right. So should be fine then. So then let's take a quick look at the APIs. I don't think there was anything controversial last time, but I think we also didn't really talk about it much because we were just hung up on the layering portion of it.
Yep.
But it seemed like, you take a reader in, and then that's pretty much it. I think the only question was, do we need that many overloads? I think,
I
but
added the overloads, but I just made a mirror of the stream ones. I don't know if they're all
I added a few missing
needed.
ones this morning, but
Oh,
this
thanks.
should be a complete list. But for what it's worth, given that this is just APIs that are meant to be used by infrastructure only, I think we might just get away by only exposing the JSON type info ones. But
The
again, like
context
for
ones, maybe.
now we can get rid of the context ones, the ones that accept system.type, and maybe the JSON serializer options. But like if we wanted to expose essential functionality without polluting IntelliSense, I think just the JSON type info overloads would be kind of the bare minimum we would be looking at.
sorry, the one thing you said in the middle, which I didn't understand why you would say that, is like, why do you think these would only be used by infrastructure?
So I wouldn't expect that somebody would be calling these APIs directly to serialize. It would usually be done by, kind of
ASP.NET Core.
middlewares like ASP.NET Core. So in that case, usually they would just be resolving and caching the JSON type info instances themselves, which is kind of
Well,
an
sometimes we have to mirror these APIs in ASP.NET Core because we have a write JSON async API. Actually, do we have to change those, Brandon, or Stefan, or do we just keep those as is and make it called the new APIs internally?
Yeah, the internal.
I
it's
mean,
just
we would.
internally.
We just have to get the type info.
So it's
which
probably internal change
for-
only,
for
not
that-
for API change.
Yes.
we could probably cache using generic fields.
Like
and
when I
stuff.
was playing with this already, like
Yeah.
a couple months ago, it was just internal changes for those overloads.
That's nice. It would be good to see the minimal set compared to this set. Doing a mirror is probably easier, so we don't miss things when things get added. But I don't have any real pushback beyond we should make whatever overload we expose the most capable, and maybe make a couple of other things optional if they're not going to be overloads that make them nullable. So if you have to pass a type info, maybe it should be a nullable type info.
Well, I'm
So you
thinking
cannot
about
pass
the
it?
code we'd end up writing, right? And write is JSON async, and we'd have to resolve it right out of our options, like every time. It might not be the easiest thing to cache. Because right, you'd have to go like JSON serializer options, get type resolver, get type. Like we could do it.
I think we did. Like, I think we had to make those changes to make AOT work in 8.
We did. Yeah.
So there's a lot of code in there that does this already.
Isn't that
But
also
it's fine
Jason?
in like the context of serializing. Oh, sorry, Brennan.
Doesn't Jason already do that internally if you call the other methods? So it's like we
Probably.
just keep calling it in
But
our
it-
code now.
But it has caching. It has this like thread safe cache of the last type info used or something crazy like that.
Yeah, but the only issue with, for example, the overloads that accept JSON serializer options is because of how they have been configured to work by default, is that they necessarily need to be annotated as requires unreferenced code, requires dynamic code,
Yeah.
and as such, it introduces noise when you're interested in AOT applications. Like basically, if you were to expose an essential API surface, it would just be the JSON type info overloads. They are AOT friendly, and everything else kind of follows as an accelerator method, which does some basic mapping to obtain the JSON type info and then just call into that. So I don't have any strong opinions, like exposing the same surface as what we have with Stream sounds okay, or using a reduced API surface sounds okay as well. No strong opinions here.
How many overloads are there currently for like serialization?
Oh, it's a ton of overloads.
So so in some ways it's like a drop in the bucket. In other ways, it's like we're making a bad problem worse, maybe. But like, I do agree that like the 95% case at least is gonna be ASP.NET Core code using it, not like application code.
It'll be app code in cases where people want to do something custom, like grab the pipe from the request and then pass it in and get the results back. But
They could, yeah, and like on the reading side, maybe more because that's kind of the only programmatic way to like read just like whatever type you kind of want and just code. for writing, I think with minimal APIs and stuff, and with write as JSON async, like people use that a lot as opposed to grabbing the response body. But
So yeah, there are currently 5 overloads, and all 5 are being proposed as re-overloaded here.
I see. So it's only the stream ones for that makes sense.
Wait, 4 of them are being proposed here.
Yeah, good for serializing
I mean,
string and stuff.
I don't
We
know
shouldn't
which
freeze
one's
on-
missing.
We shouldn't freeze on this. Let's just do the same overloads. Unless someone has to change their heart.
Yeah, I haven't heard any objections. It does kind of paint the point home that like stream and pipes are like equivalent in capability, more or less.
Do pipes not have sync APIs at all?
No.
So the overload that is missing from that list is the weakly typed overload that accepts JSON serializer options. So
So
I see.
this one in that style.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do we just want all of the async ones?
I think so.
Plus the one that's missing.
Yeah.
So do we want it just to match stream exactly?
I think let's go for a one-to-one.
Yeah.
That's context.
Is there are we missing the async enumerable one? Is that a different call?
No, it's
Okay,
this
good.
one.
Is it
But
this
again,
one?
because it's requires dynamic code and requires unreferenced code, it's unlikely to be used in a context of writing a middleware or writing a framework. So we're just exposing them for completeness, not because we expect them to be used at all.
Oh, those not nulls. Alright, so we're doing all of them, and we're not... So how are these handling the async enumerable? Because they just...
So
I mean, the serialize is not applicable, but deserialize, they're the same group?
So serialization is handled automatically within any async enumerable you find in the type graph, but there's a dedicated deserialize async enumerable method that kind of handles streaming deserialization of root level values.
Right,
yeah.
so does that one need to be in this
Do we
group
need that
as
one?
well?
I haven't thought about that one, to be honest.
I saw it, but I left it out.
It seems reasonable that we might be able to support a pipe reader overload for that one, although there's no prototype that I know of.
I mean, like, we can just say that we're approving it, and if you can't make it work, you just don't ship it. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Again, it seems unlikely to be used as well, but
I can
there's
see
not. It wouldn't require a lot of. You get it for free essentially. Like the infrastructural code is shared. So
Yeah, I see it. It's shared.
Okay, so we want... Oh, that's in fact the thing I copied. And so we want both deserialize async enumerables. Email, your site's busted.
What's happening?
I don't know, I'm clicking on things and it's not doing stuff.
Well, we just transferred the domain to Microsoft, so maybe there's some hiccup there, but
Alright, this is the deserialize async that got missed. And then I need the other... No, don't.
Got the Blazor error again on the site.
I pasted it on chat if you want the updated signature.
Okay. Okay, so we're doing all of them, and in a few seconds of repeating redundant information, I'll finally have all the signatures up to date. So I get to remove all the not null words that the site sprinkles in. Proposal. Loop. That seems like too many braces. All right.
Some of these will need annotation. I'm guessing we're omitting that for the purposes of API review.
Sure.
I was referring to the linker annotations. So some of these are, requires an reference code, requires dynamic code. I'm sure that we'll discover these during the implementation.
There we go. Alright. Sounds like... And... that yes, we talked about it, and that is the consequence. Bloop.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I think that only got bumped off of the agenda like 6 meetings in a row. Okay. Cannot set read mode after creating a named pipe client stream instance 83072. Is that still you, Eric? Don't everybody talk at once? Because I'm not sure why I can't set read mode is due to not exposing a constructor. Alright, sounds like nobody's willing to talk about this one. Should we skip it?
I don't have context on this one. I was just listing it because it seemed like related to this one, but I don't think it is. It's just a completely disjoint API. Yes,
Yeah,
because-
system IO pipes versus system IO pipelines.
Yeah. I only read the titles. I did not actually click on them.
Yep. Alright. How about add new overload to URI escape data string 40603?
I can take this one.
Oh, yeah. Here we go.
Okay, so we have existing escape and unescape methods on URI. This is what you most likely want to use whenever you have some opaque data. You just want to deserialize for your URL, but they force you to allocate everything. So we're proposing new overloads that let you avoid the input substring allocation and then the try variant, which just does spans. So you can avoid all the allocations.
And the only false return from the try escape is that destination's too small?
That's right.
Okay. Seems fine to me. Any objections?
Oh, that was quick. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to get an easy one every now and then. Add assembly builder set entry point of a method info. 97015.
Yeah. So now we have new persistent assembly builder implementation that allows saving assemblies. Now we need a set entry point for the assembly in case it's exe file. So .NET Framework had this method, so I just proposing to add same method. Only difference is it's virtual because the assembly builder now abstract.
Do you know why we missed this previously? Or I guess why we didn't have it previously?
Yeah, we didn't had it previously.
We didn't have it previously because we didn't support emitting.
Saving.
And there's no point in setting an entry point if you can't write the assembly to disk.
So it was intentionally left out, but then it just got missed when we added save?
Well, we're still working on adding save, right? So this is part of this work item.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, is save virtual too, or is it for some reason different than the other methods?
I think save core is virtual, right? That's why that works.
Oh, and that's why we have this alternative design.
Yeah. I think my question in general is, so I don't mind the API proposal as it stands here. My only concern is what happens when you reuse a .NET Framework binary that uses these APIs on the upcoming version of core. Does it just work or will it not work? Because I think it would be expected to say, now that we added the assembly builder save APIs, that you can reuse a .NET Framework binary that uses those on .NET Framework and just run them on core and have it work.
Yeah, I mean, so if it's declared virtual in core, will that work? The compiler tends to write down call virt, except for the times it decides that it can write call, and I don't think anyone understands when those times are. Everyone can speculate, but the answer is it writes call when it feels like it. So this is certainly the safer one, and assuming this is going to do any kind of checks of like the method better belong to the assembly that you're saying is it's going to be the entry point for, and that it's not null, etc., then doing the validation checks once and then dispatching to the core is way better than trying to write it the same way twice, because we always screw it up when we delegate the argument validation.
Yeah, so why would it have to be virtual to begin with?
I think it needs to be virtual for the same reason that save needs to be virtual. Of somebody needs, like, the real assembly builder doesn't live in the in this place we have it's a derived type that lives in some other assembly that does the work now.
I forgot to update the save core. It's now virtual because we cannot just add abstract. Because the assembly builder became abstract in 8.0, and we shouldn't add a new abstract method to that. And so we're adding virtual.
Yeah, is your question why does it need to be virtual or why isn't it abstract?
Virtual, but because I was under the impression it just sets a property somewhere that is already public. But if that's not the case, then if there's actually work that needs to happen, yeah, then that makes sense. Yeah, if I think honestly that but I think it would be easier for us to do what we have on screen right now, the alternative, because that one we can reason about, and that's obviously compatible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's A, safer because we're not mixing a virtual in one with a non-virtual in the other, and B, matches design guidelines better. So,
Yeah, but to your earlier point, I think the rules the compiler followed was if the compiler knows the type and the compiler knows it's not null, which would be the normal pattern where you say var x equals new and then x dot blah, I think the compiler might have emitted regular calls at that point.
I went down this rabbit hole a little while ago and changing ASP.NET Core. I think it's near impossible to not get it to call Culvert, but like I know so many experts are here, so I'd love to be corrected.
I know that after the nullable reference types feature was introduced, where like something when it's in a guard pattern, it knows that it's positively identified, it can't be null. Then it's like, oh, call is faster, so let's write down call for the first time ever. And
I think the rules in the native compiler were more fuzzy, but what I said roughly was true at some point. But
yeah,
I think that they also changed it. I think so. I don't know where they changed it to, but in general, I think what Jeremy said is true. We don't quite know all the cases where the compiler makes these decisions, so it was we generally said it's safer to assume that you don't get the call you want.
okay, and it looks like entry method is the name that it has in framework, so that is the correct.
Yeah, and we take method info, not method base, right?
Yep.
Yeah. What about the overload that takes PE file kinds? We don't care about that one?
Yes. That is very .NET Framework specific and isn't really useful for now.
Really? I mean, how do you set then console app versus DLL versus Windows app then?
Yeah, right now it's if there is an entry point, it's going to be counted as XR, or if there is no entry point set, then it's DLL. But in the future, if people need to set more options, we can add PE header builder, setting the PE header builder. But the other overload that exists in the .NET Framework doesn't really need in .NET Core. So.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is because if we find ourselves in the future wanting to add set entry point with a PE file kind, it's a bit unfortunate if we have the pattern that we currently have here, because you would probably need to add two methods then, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
the
there would-
header information doesn't have to be combined with entry point, I would say. It's better to be different method.
Is PE file kind already included in core?
What do you find?
It is not.
Okay. Is the type PE file kind?
No, that not existing .NET Core.
Okay.
Yeah, if we're sure we don't need it, it's fine. If we find ourselves wanting to add it later, then it sucks a bit, but.
All right. We don't need the. We believe we will never be using PE file kinds because otherwise this gets messy because then we'll have two virtual set entry point cores. And if the type was already there, I was going to say we should just go ahead and make it take the parameter here, even though it would only ever pass in console application.
I mean, Booyah is right in the sense that the only people that would need this are people that build compilers with it. Because if your goal is to just write some stuff that you can load for caching reasons, you would only ever need DLL. And generally speaking, we don't want people to use reflection emit as a compilation pipeline anyway.
But I mean, if they're only trying to produce the DLL, they wouldn't need set entry point.
Fair enough. Yeah, by that.
Which,
I mean, just judging by grep app, like there's only 44 hits of PE file kinds, so it's not, and they're all compilers. So it's
it's fair. I'm just, but just pointing out the only reason you would call set entry point is you're making an executable, and
yeah, that's true.
And that's the time that you would care. Is it a whatever those three options were?
Yeah.
DLL console application or window application. But if we're only doing DLL and console application, then so be it.
As for now, until somebody asks for something else.
Wait, is this just like an enum, the P file kind or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, you could add it, right? Is that like that's this whole debate? Like it's like three values.
It's a bad one
I don't
because
know.
it's named plural, but it's not flags and it doesn't have a zero value. But it is still just an enum. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems simple. If you're worried, we know that there's been feature creep on this, but whatever. Like, it's probably not the highest impact thing.
So I mean, it kind of goes to Booyah, like why are we adding the set entry point? Do we have someone asking for it, or is it just something that we just want to do due to completeness?
For feature completeness, and it will be needed anyways for some people, but I don't know about this enum.
So then, honestly, I would say if we do it for completeness, I would just grab the enum as well and just add the whole thing and then call it good. Because then it's like, well, then like whether it's a good idea or not a good idea, at least we have the API, right?
Yeah. We can choose to not expose the public member, but it'll be there for the protected one, which is amusing, but
right.
Honestly,
We just
I
don't
would
paint
probably
ourselves
just
into a
add-
corner. could throw for things we don't support. Yeah. Like,
I mean, honestly, I would probably just add the public method and then just have only the worker method take both.
So you'd go ahead and add both overloads to public set entry point.
Yeah, I would add both overloads to set entry point, and I would add a parameter to set entry point core.
Yep.
And then call it good. Like, I don't think it buys us much to piecemeal this.
Thanks, reference source.
Yeah. Control Shift V.
Thank you.
It's still annoying, but it's at least less annoying. Because I always forget, but then you just
Is that
more
the
annoying when you find the random Office program that doesn't support it.
right? Yeah.
Is that the
Like
OS or the application?
OneNote doesn't support it.
Apparently the application. Apparently everything I do is the browser though.
So
I don't know.
So the browser, like it wrote 2 clipboard streams and that's selecting between them?
I don't know. It works in like VS, right? But I mean, in VS Code.
What does
I
this
guess that's
shortcut
the
do?
browser. Removes the HTML or markup.
Yeah.
Yeah. The copy, Control V, be like, ah! And then Control Shift V, ah. Alright. The overload calls
you're
it
using
file
WinV.
kind.
If you're using WinV, then that sometimes works as well and gives you an option to paste without formatting. For the clipboard history.
I just round trip everything through Notepad. If you don't use Windows V, you never used it, Jeremy, you're missing out.
I mean, it popped UI, therefore I would like never use it.
Well, you have to turn it on.
Oh,
After
okay.
that, it's just the history of everything in your clipboard. It's fucking amazing.
I'll consider it at a time that I'm not on camera. I don't know what's in my clipboard right now. I don't want that to show up.
No, I mean, if you turn it on, it just starts empty, right? Because you have...
Fair enough. Alright, so 2 overloads to set entry point. As we see over here, file kind is what it called it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so that one should just defer with console application. And, yeah. And then chat-s will set entry point throw if it's called multiple times. I don't know. It'll do whatever it does in .NET Framework.
Probably not, I would say. Given that it's set, it's just last one wins.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Let's click and see what it does. Yep, last one wins. Should it be nullable or defaulted? No, we shouldn't. We're not changing defaults because these are exactly matching the signatures from .NET Framework, and the virtual shouldn't have a default of any kind.
Yeah.
And method info, it'll throw if it's null, so nothing should be nullable, and that's an enum, so we're all good to go. Oh, I should point out that these are pluses.
So we don't accept null. So how do you clear the entry point? You don't? I find it surprising that it would throw.
If entry method is null, A and E. So,
Huh.
yeah, once you call it, you can't
well.
undo it.
So don't do it then.
Yeah, don't change your mind in the middle of writing an assembly.
Whatever.
Good enough. Alright. So now that we've changed our mind on that point, are we happy now?
I mean, as happy as you can get when you add APIs with .NET Framework compat, right?
Touche.
Like, I'm sure there's somebody that's dusting off the old compiler code base and is like, yeah, time to port that to .NET Core.
Yep. Go tell Jared he can go rewrite Roslyn to use Assembly Builder now. That'll be fun to watch. Watch how big the snort is.
You know that their backend for interactive had two code paths at some point, one using ref emit and one uses emitting bits. They yanked it out in favor of just emitting bits.
All right, this one's me. This one has already been merged, so because we wanted to get it all in for preview 1. So we're reviewing stuff. We can absolutely change anything we want, although we felt pretty comfortable doing so because it's following a very standard set of patterns we already have. Basically, if you imagine all of the APIs we have defined on the generic math interfaces, and mathf, but just doing each of those operations for all of the elements in a span, that's what these methods are. So it's the same names that show up almost all of them. Is the same names that show up on the generic math APIs, with constrained to the same thing, following the same pattern we already had on tensor primitives of x and destination, or x, y and destination, and so on.
We have an I trigonometric functions. I don't remember that at all.
We do, yeah. The I floating point one coalesces multiple such things, but they're split apart into those sub interfaces for just trig or just whatever.
Yeah,
Very strong com vibes here.
Don't you remember the 6 weeks we spent reviewing all the generic math interfaces?
Well, I remember most of the ones that were operator related, binary integer and addition and all of that. I don't remember the trigonometric ones. But yeah, well, I hyperbolic functions.
I was gonna say I'm pretty sure that there's a thing extending that, adding the h's, but
yeah, I mean clearly. So.
The other thing to note here is that we basically reviewed this same API surface a month ago and approved it for vector 64, 128, 256, 512, and vector of t, so that we had public surface area for the vectorized primitives. So we basically, when this one's approved, we'll have the scalar functions available on float and double. We'll have the vector primitives available on vector 128, 256, etc. And then we will have these tensor primitives ones, which operate on entire spans using the vector or scalar primitives depending on the t.
So are there any names here that don't already exist on interfaces?
I was about to say that there are a few. So the ones that begin with bitwise and, bitwise or, those are operators in the generic math APIs. That doesn't work here, so we named them bitwise and, bitwise or. The three APIs that start with convert, their tensor primitives already defines convert to single and convert to half, which we added when we were only adding the kind of float specific APIs. Now that we have these generic ones, you can convert from anything to anything, basically from any number to any number. So it's using the same naming convention as we have on the generic math APIs with create checked, create saturating, create truncating, except changing the verb create to convert to match what we have with convert to single and convert to half. And then I think if you scroll down, there was one more. Oh, one's complement was another one that I don't believe that shows up as an operator rather than a named method. And I think that was, can you scroll down a little more? I think that was the only other one. Oh, and XOR as well.
Notably for those ones. So for XOR, bitwise OR, bitwise AND, one's complement, those follow the names that we have been using on vector of T, vector 64, 128, 256 of T for a long time. The only thing on and notably that is XOR, not bitwise XOR. And similarly, if we were to ever expose and not, that one is just called and not bitwise and not. But that one's not in this list.
Sorry, presumably the ones we have for the operators, like, aren't there already names that we already have? Like, I think the original guidelines said something like, don't rely on operators, always have a named method anyway. And I think the ones that we have here, like one's complement, for example, they're already in the guidelines, and I think they're supposed to be bitwise and bitwise OR as well. So they should all match existing.
We don't expose those on the generic math interfaces, though, do we, Tanner? We don't have something named bitwise and bitwise OR. We only have the operators, right?
Yeah, we didn't, because we didn't feel the need, in part because generic math requires static virtuals and interfaces, and if you're supporting static virtuals and interfaces in generic math, you are likely supporting operators.
Well, it's not
and
just
if we ever got feedback, we can always add them as dims.
Yeah, it wasn't just supporting operators. It was like, you have a type. The only way you can tell it has a single ampersand operator is to try it. IntelliSense doesn't show operators. Named methods, it does. So it's not just language support. It's also usability guideline.
Yeah, but I think the point from Stephen was we haven't done it. But what I'm saying is, I think if you open up FDG, there's a table somewhere that says if you have these operators, you should have methods with those names. So those names are already effectively approved in the sense that, if you have those are the names you're supposed to use. So there doesn't seem much for us to review here except saying yes. There you go.
Also, notably, IntelliSense does show operators.
Okay.
If you do value dot, it will actually show you all of the operators that are available, and if you tab onto it, it will
erase your dot.
Space it as you expect. Yep.
Fair enough. I've never thought of doing dot to look for an operator, since the dot would be invalid. But yeah, so bitwise and bitwise OR are named what they are because the logicals took the simple names.
Right.
And notably, we have shift left, shift right, logical and arithmetic, not unsigned right shift, signed right shift, and left shift. That matches what we had done for the vector types as well, and groups them together rather than separating them apart.
Right. The only question that I have is, and I'm not suggesting we're doing this, but like the way they're defined here is they only work if you actually have a read-only span, right? If you have a span on the left-hand side, extension methods, never mind. They're all this.
Well, so, but where you're headed with that, we're actually, we had a discussion actually yesterday in C# LDM where the aim is to fix what you were just talking about for C# 13. Basically, make read-only span a first-class citizen in C#, such that just as with arrays, if you had a span of T or an array of T, everything on a read-only span of T would just work. So if you had an extension on read-only span, that would also show up on string, for example. And we had that discussion because of what you're looking at on the screen. We've been dealing with this for years with memory extensions in particular, where we have 2 or in some cases 4 times as many overloads as we would want because of what you're talking about. This just makes it even worse, because can you imagine, we have, we're end up like 150 methods here. We'd have to double or triple or quadruple them, which we really don't want to do. And so we're trying to fix that in the language.
But it's literally specific for read-only span. It's not that they fixed the problem of extension methods are not invocable via implicit conversion. So they're not doing the generic thing. They just do it.
It's making read-only span a first-class citizen in the language with regards to variance and conversions, just like it already has for array. Fred basically went through the C# specification and pulled out everywhere that array is called out specially and kind of duplicated it for span effectively.
Gotcha.
And in particular, it shows up here because if you try and call, sum of magnitudes or something, and you pass in a span or an array, and it takes a read-only span, you get a strange error about it was unable to infer the type because it can't see through the span to the T. And so that kind of thing will just work now. You could pass in a span or an array, and it'll do all the type inference correctly, assuming that work lands, which we really hope it will.
Oh, because I see. So it's not just a problem of extension methods; it's also a problem when you do things with generics and then
exactly
you can't infer the
Yeah, if you have an API that's generic on T and takes a read-only span of T, and you pass in a span of T or an array of T, or if T was char, you try and pass in a string, the compiler today can't infer the T.
Compiler's like, I know what you're doing here, but I'm not gonna sit there.
So does that mean if the feature doesn't land, this comes back doubled where all the sources are span?
No, I think if the feature doesn't land, it means we have a wart where someone has to explicitly specify the open angle bracket float, close angle bracket until the language addresses it. I really don't want to add another 150 or 300 overloads.
Or just at their call site to new read-only span of their span.
Yeah, or they have a cast or something.
Would lock the
you have
T.
to do a little bit more to tell the compiler what T is.
Yeah.
So I realize this is early, but I mean, at some point when we add tensor of T, do you expect those to all be instance methods then?
Not all, but tensor. My expectation, and Tanner can correct me if his vision is different, but my expectation is tensor of T will have a whole lot of operators, and then some subset of the surface area here.
Gotcha. And they're all presumably
that's
pure, as in they give you back a new tensor?
That would be the intent, yes. It's possible in some cases we might be able to refer to some of the same memory, maybe with some sort of copy on write behavior or whatever, but fundamentally you get back a different instance that you can logically treat as a separate instance when we get there. We're not there yet.
I think in particular, so for performance and correctness and safety and all kinds of other things, I imagine that Tensor is basically going to be a better multi-dimensional array. And so it will likely be in some sense mutable itself. It will have to be because you can't go copying gigabytes of memory on every single operation. But there will be the option for users to do, just like these tensor overloads have the option for the destination to be the same as the span, we will likely have our operator set up such that you can use the same input as the destination as the input. That way you can do the safe thing and still get the performance.
So then between tensor primitives and tensor of T, should I just think of as tensor primitives effectively like a low-level worker that we use from tensor of T?
For much of it, yes.
It's basically all of the low-level algorithms that take the spans. It doesn't do any of the tracking of the memory lifetimes. It doesn't track things like dimensionality, so it doesn't track what your strides are or anything like that, whereas tensor of T would do that stuff for you. So these APIs could be used by anyone who has a tensor-like data structure to give them CPU accelerated implementation, whereas tensor of T gives them a .NET safe wrapper that makes it very friendly to use.
And presumably when we ship tensor of T, we put it in the same package as tensor primitives?
That's the current plan.
Cool.
So I see that it's consistent, but I'm gonna ask, how did we end up with everything called x and y instead of like value or left and right or etc.?
We'd have to go back and review the
In
design
mini-
decision from tensor primitives in 8.0.
Yeah, in many cases there isn't a logical value for them, or there isn't a logical name for them.
Right, but I feel like what we've been
and
doing in intrinsics is this would be value, or in the since it's a span thing, it would now say source. But where we have here at x and y, like that these are left and right and add-end in our intrinsics APIs.
Yeah, and so we had discussed that, and then we got to the point of because we have to have some that are basically X because there is no better name. Then, because it's not, if you have two parameters, it's not always left and right. A simple example is atan2. That's not strictly left and right. It's technically numerator and denominator, but any kind of API you look at across the globe uses X and Y for the names of atan2. So not only using left and right would we then be inconsistent with the rest of the world and ourselves for the scalar APIs, but then we'd have an inconsistency within these APIs on whether we're using X, like math docs do and like the scalar APIs do and like other languages do, or whether we're saying value or left and right. So we said just use X and Y for consistency throughout all of this because it's math.
Speaking of atan2, that one says yx instead of xy.
Yeah, yes, that's how atan2 is.
I hate
like
numerics.
Universally, that's how atan2 is. This isn't just numerics. This is like fundamentally math, and calculators do it yx. Like if you break out your TI 84, it will be yx.
Oh, because it's rise over run. Right. Fair enough. Because yes, when opening it, my first thought was these should all be source and destination, but they're called X in the singular form, and then we get down to these nonsense things where they are what they are. Yeah. So aside from hating all the X's and Y's, which we won't change here, that seems fine to me. The only thing that I'll bring up just to make sure we're happy with it is we have the ones complement named method that is depending on an operator constraint interface just because we don't have a named version. So if our assertion is the named versions of these go on the operator's interface and not on some other interface, then we're good, and otherwise we might want to think of, do we want to change these constraints?
I think the assertion is bitwise operators does define
constraint.
one's complement. It's just called it operator whatever.
Right, but then if we were to add the friendly named version, that we would put it on ibitwise operators even though it's not an operator.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, but it's
it is an operator. It's just the friendly name of it.
Yeah, it's just yeah.
Fair enough. Again, that was if we thought we were gonna, if we ever added it, if it would be a different interface. That is the only question. So with that, it seems fine.
No, I think we already said that if you want to add stuff, you would not introduce new interfaces. You would generally like just dim the interfaces, right? And I think the whole point would be to say, if you want a named version for an operator, it should go where the operator went, right? Otherwise, it would be very weird anyway, because now you have two independent interfaces, and you could implement one, not the other. That would be weird, right?
And ideally, the language just gets extension everything, and then someone can just define a static extension method called this instead for languages where you really need it.
Something tells me COBOL.NET will have trouble calling any of these anyway in the foreseeable future. So
I mean, that's the net answer, right?
yeah, it took 20 minutes to get there, but
That's not bad. You divide that by the number of APIs here, we're making really good time.
that's fair. And we
Yeah.
found X. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, I see many bad names in here, but they're consistent. So
You say bad names, I say standardized names.
hypot
Also, rich coming.
is a terrible verb.
It's also rich coming from the guy that has all the crypto APIs that have horrible names.
They don't all have horrible names. Just many of them.
90%.
Notably, all the cases like hypot and square root and stuff, we often chose that name because that's what calculators use as well. It's kind of the industry standard name, whether you're on a computer in programming or off of the computer on Wolfram Alpha or your calculator, etc.
Yeah, Steve, were there any concerns or consequences with the overloads? I assume they're not introducing any kind of ambiguity because you would have
No,
found
these
that
are
out
all
already.
places where. So we generally have a pattern with these of we have an overload that takes 2 spans and an overload that takes like for things that take multiple arguments, things that take 2 spans, or then things that take a span and a scalar. And in general, we have those two, but in places where the operation isn't commutative, we also want scalar span, not just span scalar. But we were missing that for things like divide and subtract. So this is filling in gaps.
Okay, so of the 3 divides we have now, which is span, span, span T, and T span, we had the first 2 but missed the T span.
Right, exactly.
Okay. But max is commutative. Did we just...
But we didn't have... We only had the one that took the 2 spans, not the one that took a span and a scalar.
Okay. So divide and subtract, or we missed commutivity, or lack thereof, and the maxes and mins are we missed the scalar
exactly
addition. Fair enough.
And obviously we don't have ones that take just 2 scalars because
that's not a tensor.
Yeah.
Obviously.
No, because those are already defined on the T's.
Yes. So I think that's all we had for today, but I guess
I saw Carlos showed up. I don't know if he's still here, but I think he was here for the name pipe client stream one. Carlos, are you still around?
Yep, I'm here.
All right.
I can talk about that.
We'll return to 83072.
Yep. So the gist is we never ported an API from framework that would allow you to use the pipe access rights in a named pipe client stream. So the workaround for that is kind of a bit more complicated. So if we can approve an API to make it simple, that would be great. So the background and motivation is we cannot set read mode after creating a named pipe client stream instance. Is to not exposing the named pipe client stream constructor that accepts a pipe access rights. So as you can see the proposal, we are adding a constructor that is only supported on Windows, which would take a pipe access rights. And we would also expose the flags, flag enums, pipe access rights. And So the way we would use it is we would create a client on the server, and we could specify the desired access rights in one of the arguments. And when we connect and then we try to set the read mode, it works. The alternative design would be to create a factory method like we did for anonymous pipe server streams. But it's not necessary and maybe a misnomer because this isn't really about ACL, but about access rights. And it says here, contrast that to those existing factory methods which take pipe security, which is an ACL concept. Splitting hairs, perhaps, since the API is related to access and is likely not supported on non-Windows, but I think we can do better here by exposing the exact missing API, so we should. The risks would be moving types around carries with some risk. Luckily, all the assemblies here are in the shared frameworks in 6.0 and referenced as a set, so it's less of a risk. The original issue, or where we found this, was that if you created a name pipe server stream and a client, then connected, and then try to set the read mode, we would get an exception. In .NET Framework, there used to be a constructor on the client side that accepted pipe access rights, which would solve the issue and would allow the user to change read mode later. And you can see the example right there. Unfortunately, we have imported the constructor to .NET Core Plus. And the underlying problem is that according to the documentation of the Windows method create name pipe, we need to pass the file write attributes access right when constructing the pipe handle to be able to modify it after creation. That's explained in that document I linked. The .NET Framework solution worked because it would set file write attributes when using the constructor that takes the pipe access rights argument. Unfortunately, the only workaround available in NetCore Plus is to manually construct the save pipe handle, making sure to pass file write attributes to the p invoke, which is not a straightforward solution. Then create a client stream instance using the constructor that takes the pipe handle, while also making sure to pass through to the argument that indicates that the pipe should get connected. And then you can set the read mode and you would not get the exception. And I wrote also an example for a workaround for anyone that hits this problem. It's in one of my test repos, but we should consider solving it in runtime. The workaround that I provided had to call an internal constructor from pipe security using reflection. That's another argument supporting the idea that we should provide the solution ourselves. But yeah, that's the general idea.
But I'm a bit confused by this. We already have done the thing that you have listed in alternative designs, as far as I can tell, have we not?
I think it's leaving off there. Yeah. What I assume the signature is different than the one that already exists.
Well, the proposal proposes to expose pipe access rights, but that already is exposed.
Oh, it's saying this isn't saying this is what it would look like on name pipe server stream ACL. It's this is what we have on name pipe server stream ACL.
No, I mean, if you scroll all the way up to API proposal,
Yeah.
they say the proposal is to have a constructor and to expose the enum. I'm saying the enum is already exposed.
It's in the wrong assembly. Because when we made pipes, we said we were only bringing the only things that went into pipes were things that worked on all OSs, and then the ACL stuff got bolted on in a sidecar assembly.
Right.
And because all the ACL stuff is Windows only. So I mean, one question, and I'm asking this from an API design, not from a I've thought about what the security implications are. Why don't we just pass the flag ourselves and not add the overload at all? Just change our default access rights to include it.
I don't know that from the top of my head. Let me check the workaround that I wrote.
Security.
compatible.
What if I don't want to be allowed to change the read mode after connect? No, I have no idea.
And use
That
.NET 8.
does seem reasonable. Yeah.
I mean, like I understand we had a functionality and we want to bring it back, but if we're just saying we're trying to solve this one specific scenario, there are other ways we can do that. Like, would it make it? Is this a thing that fails on Windows but works on Linux? In which case, I think the answer is we should make it work on Windows because we want it to work similarly on all OSs.
I mean, it is interesting though, right? So we already have that create static method with pipe access rights.
Yep.
So what that means though is like people are passing things that they think are doing things, right? But they're not. Like if they're calling it today, right? Because those pipe access right attributes, whatever, not working, right? Because apparently you needed a handle creation or something, and it's too late by the time it gets to the right assembly. So like from a correctness perspective, like, you know, we should do what we're saying we're doing, right?
I mean, Carlos, please correct me, but I assume it works if you call the name pipe server stream acl.create. It's just that assuming this constructor exists in framework, it only has like half the options that that one does, and people are getting confused by the what to do with the other half of the parameters. So this is just would be the simplified overload of create. If we say
I
it
think
stays
so.
in the other assembly. Right? Because if they call this guy, they can pass the access rights and pass null for the ACL, which means get the default ACL. So this is entirely possible right now, right?
No, I mean otherwise he wouldn't have been doing all that. That the workaround's kind of crazy.
Because the last thing here is this enum, and if that doesn't work,
Right.
then that's a bug, and we need to fix the bug.
Right. No, that's my understanding.
I remember it wasn't a bug. We're to try to remember. I wrote this out a year ago, but it was reported by someone first, by a customer.
So quickly,
see.
Carlos, like if you could call this create method and set right attributes, like why does your workaround not just do that? Like why is it doing manual p invokes and stuff?
Let me check. Really, I wrote this a year ago, and I was just catching up earlier
Yeah.
to be able to do this. All right, so it needs to pass in the constructor or in the p invoke when you create the pipe, and there was some limitation, and there was a really long discussion in the issue that prompted this first. Create additional access rights. Cannot find the information for that. The ACL extension method. I remember it didn't work. I just don't remember exactly why.
So my understanding was that the way we designed these extension or these factory methods was that they just call the normal public constructors and then modify the handle after the fact, right? So that's because they just sit on top. They're not actually doing the p invoke directly to create the thing. They just call the other public APIs and then just modify the handle. So I guess the problem is
Yeah.
if depending on how the handle was created, you may not be able to do that after the fact anymore, right? So now you're basically in the position where you almost have to duplicate what the old constructors did, plus the echo stuff, which I don't think we wanted to do originally.
Right. Like scroll down to like Eric St. John's comment from like March 8th. Like I think he agrees that like it's basically a bug. Like you just need to pass this to the constructor so it instantiates the handle correctly. Otherwise it's wrong. You can't change it later.
Oh, okay. So the factory method would benefit from having this constructor because now we could pass the rights properly, and we wouldn't have this exception being thrown unexpectedly because the user did pass the rights. We just didn't have a constructor to pass it to. With
Exactly.
this API proposal, we would have a constructor that would take that and would form the pipe properly, and whatever we return through the factory method would actually allow the user to set the read mode without throwing an exception. I think that's what you were trying to say, right?
Right. Well, I mean, we don't need the constructor. Like from a pure API perspective, there's a way to do this, and you have a bug that it doesn't work. You could fix that by making the create method more complicated and reduplicating the work. You could fix that by we keep the access control assembly as a different ref set, but we merge the functionality of the two entirely and use an internal constructor. Like moving the reference target of this enum and adding a new constructor is not the only way to solve this problem. There's also potentially we change our default access rights.
Not I mean,
again,
not really, because you're still ignoring like, I mean, if we know for a fact that that's the only access right that you, or that's the only access right that needs to be set during handle creation and everything else can be done afterwards, then I guess you could keep it. But or you have to like move the creation of the handle, right? Like I guess this is what you're saying, into the like Windows only like derived assembly, like or duplicate that obviously.
Yeah, if the access rights is not default, then it needs to go p invoke to call create handle with the right flag, and then can now defer to an existing constructor using the already opened handle. So like we can add it, but this does not need to be added to solve the problem. There are many ways to solve the problem that don't require adding this. So I think we should only add it if we want to add it.
But basically, like, just to unpack what you're saying, basically the current implementation of the ECL assembly just calls the public constructors, right? In order to fix it, we would have to say it doesn't do that. It just constructs one from inside the ECL assembly by just p invoking directly and passing whatever.
At least if you passed a non-default value for pipe access rights.
Right, like you'd end up using the handle constructor, right, or whatever, after you've done it all manually.
And we also have the option of we merge these in the implementation assembly, but leave them as separate refs. Like, I think historically we had them as separate refs because we didn't have this guy.
You mean the annotations?
Yeah, we didn't have the platform annotations, and so we said if something doesn't work on all platforms, then get rid of it. And then people wanted to set the ACLs, so then we said, fine, here's the way to set the ACLs. And I think this is just a wart of our growing up from one OS to multiple OSs, and this came along too early. But
I mean, we should look into this. But like my recollection is that I think we talked about merging all of those before, and it's just there's a lot of shit that you have to merge in. So it was actually we don't want to move them in implementation because it's a lot of shit that you have to move in. I mean, obviously from a .NET Framework compat story, I would love to just get the old constructors back because it just means more code just works. But so what I guess what I'm objecting to is just doing one-off for the one constructor here. I think if we go down the path of exposing Windows-only concepts here as constructors, I would love to do it for like all of them. It's just at that point, just declare the ECL assembly being, one of these residues of the modern factoring that we all abandoned, and then just get 100% compatible in exchange for that.
Yeah, that I agree. I think we either need to fix it with the API that we already have, or we need to bring all the named pipe client and named pipe server constructors back, like, but not this thing in the middle.
I mean, unless there's good reasons. I mean, like if the reason is, we don't want to merge them all in because it blows the implementation assembly too much, and sharing the code would be a disaster, then fine, I can live with that as well. But it seems like doing this halfway pregnant thing where we kind of halfway give up with the compat story, or we give halfway up with the annotation story. At that point, I would just rather have it, make a decision what we actually want to have.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that the thing with the ACL mode is fine. We go make we put a file in common that does the opening of the pipe handle, and then like now it does it the same way both from the real type constructor and from the delayed factory constructor, because we just unified that code. Great, this one function and 2 p invokes are copied into 2 assemblies, but who cares?
I kind of prefer that, of like all the options listed. Like, I mean, the pipe dreams about the unified assembly. Like, I don't know that I've seen a lot of like, I'll believe it when I see it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But if we can do that, it seems like that's a reasonable amount of work potentially. Shared source effectively. If
Here's
not
another
that,
comment
like,
in the
oh, sorry. Yeah, I said if we're not doing the shared code, like I would just approve this API, because like I don't see us unifying this assembly anytime soon, right? Like,
if so, I think I don't know which I prefer, top or as first or second, but there's do no API changes, and then there's just bring back all the constructors with supported OS platform, and then a super distant third is the thing on screen. Like, so distant third of I don't know that I would ever say yes to this. Like, even if we say the shared source can't work, it'd be like, great, then let's do the thing that we probably would have done if we'd already had the supported OS annotations back when we brought these types in. And we just add the constructors, and we just say, these only work on Windows. Like that, once we're doing work, I think that's the work we should do. And this is not. So my vote is closed. Go fix your bug.
Okay. We just need to make sure to document really well that, because we lack the constructor, use the ACL one, which used to have a bug. Not anymore. Well, we don't document that it used to have a bug, but we say use the ACL factory method, and it should do the same for you.
Yeah, like we have a method that doesn't do what it says it does. We should fix that bug.
Yeah. Note that the factory method try to set the access rights via an additional argument called additional access rights. So I'm kind of remembering that you would create, well, internally you would create the pipe, and then you would try to set the additional access rights. But as you just mentioned, if there's a bug because we don't have the default access rights set to the right value, that won't be possible. So yeah, I think we can close it, and get it fixed, get the bug fixed in the ACL factoring method.
I mean, this has a little bit of context. If there's no other issue for it, you can always like remove the API labels too. But yeah, probably up to you. I agree that if we can do the copying the code, that seems like the best thing after merging assemblies. I guess the worst thing would be like to not do something easy, and just leave it broken. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, if people are going from framework to .NET, if they are migrating their code, it might not be straightforward to now start using the access control assembly, find a functionality that doesn't exist because we don't have the constructor.
Well, I mean, there is an opportunity to, if you think, that's something that a lot of people want to look at the merging assembly idea, because it seems like, people would love that if it was feasible, to get more compatibility.
Steven, is there any movement on extension everything, or has this been entirely canned for now?
Oh, there definitely is. It's all part of the what was roles and is now extension, implicit and explicit extensions. I think the current likely landing place for C# 13 is, and this is me speculating, I would guess min bar for C# 13 is going to be extension static support, with a possibility of some set of things like extension properties, and then more stuff later, with the least likely thing, or the last thing to land, if it lands at all, being interfaces.
Gotcha.
That's me speculating, but I know Julian's actively working on it.
So that means at least we could make those factory methods show up on the actual type rather than this extension type.
Yeah. And we should, knock on wood, we should be able to do that if we want to in this release. That said, it's gonna, the way that the design is headed, it's not just add a static keyword before the parameter in the static signature and it just works. It's define an extension type and put stuff on there. So it would still be adding some new stuff, not modifying existing things.
But we could hopefully annotate this existing ECHL type to be like that, right?
Maybe.
And constructors, do you know whether they are going to be supported?
I don't think in this release.
All right, so we're saying no?
I have a quick question. It wouldn't be considered a breaking change to change the default access rights of a pipe when we create it?
It's probably a breaking change for someone, but I would generally say if you change a value to include more, which it sounds like it's what you're doing here, like which is generally widening what the scenarios are you can use it in, I would consider that an acceptable breaking change. But it's possible that some person somewhere doesn't like that because they make the assumptions based on it to be this narrow scope, which we know widened, but I don't know. Seems generally on the safer side.
Yeah, I mean, since it's a permissions thing, somebody would need to think about the security implications, and I don't know enough about pipes to know what it would mean, especially not live. So
What does it actually control? It's not the permissions, right? It's the settings of the handle, right?
Yeah, it's like whether you can change from like read only to write mode and stuff like that, or no, transmission mode. I don't know.
So it's a bit like the file access one, right? Where the file might be you might have read write access to the file, but the handle is only supports reading, for example.
yeah.
Is that considered a security thing? I mean, it's all within your process, right?
I don't, since it's a named pipe. I don't know if that would leave if that's your local handle, or if it modifies the mode of the pipe, and somebody else attaching to it now has the ability to change things when they wouldn't have, and so
Yeah, I thought it's just your side of it, but
Yeah.
maybe that's wrong. Yeah.
So it's consider changing the defaults so this API is consistent across OSs, but run that through, I don't know, Levi.
Yeah, it's just a little weird, right? Because on full framework, it does one thing, like it actually does what you asked for. And here we're like, well, to avoid bugs, you're just being as permissive as possible. Like, I don't think it's a security issue, and it might be the tactical fix, but it's not ideal.
Right.
Good point. If framework does it, then we need to find out how framework does it and match it in .NET.
My point's more of, if setting the read mode works on Linux because we don't have the same underlying permissions model there, then saying we're changing the default attributes is not we're working around a problem. It's we're making the I don't care what OS I'm on a more predictable behavior.
I see. No, yeah, if this is something that works on Linux and breaks on Windows with the defaults, that is an interesting argument for just changing the behavior, notwithstanding the mishandling of pipe access rights.
Yeah. And if read mode doesn't work on Linux, then I care less. But.
Right. No objection.
Alrighty. Does anybody feel they have a 10-minute issue?
I've got one that's related to the tensors from earlier. It's 98053. So I've mentioned this in several past API reviews. It's come up, it's been discussed, but we've never actually had the proposal for it yet. The general premise here is that we have the standard operators for doing multiply and addition, and then you've got fused multiply add. These two operations, they do similar things, but functionally they return different results. In particular, fused multiply add does it with a single rounding step, and so it can be 1 ULP more accurate than the other operation can. Some languages like C and C++ have this magic switch called FP fastmath, which allows you to say, just turn fastmath on for my entire program, and that leads to no end of headaches and pain because it can break programs that weren't expecting it, and it can even cause programs that have already been compiled as static libraries to now start using fastmath where they never opted into it themselves. In .NET, we of course don't have fastmath, and instead we've decided to expose estimate functions. And these are functions that are just suffixed with the name estimate, and which are allowed to return a different result on the platform depending on what is more performant for that platform. And the user, by using it, effectively opts into having this non-deterministic behavior between the platforms for those functions. So the proposal is that we expose multiply add estimate on iFloating point IEEE 754, and we plumb that through the floating point types, the vector types, and tensor primitives, so that users have a way to explicitly opt into using the faster of fused multiply add or multiply add scalar operations, depending on what is best for their platform. No, not decimal. Decimal doesn't support the concept of fused multiply addition.
So the only estimates I'm seeing are for reciprocal. Do we have it somewhere else?
Yeah, we've got reciprocal estimate, square root estimate, reciprocal square root estimate.
Yeah, I see the reciprocal square root, which is still reciprocal. I don't see a square root estimate that's not reciprocal.
That one might be in the platform-specific intrinsics.
Like APIs of
it's
.NET
one that
doesn't have it at all.
Okay. It might be one that we're missing then that I need to propose separately in the future then.
Because my concern with estimate is like reciprocal is named wrong for a verb, for a method, because methods are supposed to be verb phrases and reciprocal is a noun. So reciprocal estimate is a noun phrase, which is fine, but multiply estimate grammatically should be multiply estimated. And so I'm trying to make sure that if we pick a weird name pattern here that we're happy with it.
It's a verb if you pronounce it differently.
Fair enough. Multiply, add, estimate. Multiply it, then add, then estimate.
Query.
Yeah, in this case, I think estimate is the right word. It may not be a verb, but it clearly indicates that we are doing the thing called multiply add, and it is an estimate of that function.
Right, which would mean that it would be estimated multiplication.
So the other APIs have already shipped in .NET 8. Sorry, the reciprocal ones. So we've already locked into this convention.
.NET 5.
Right.
Okay.
I think.
But again, what's weird is reciprocal estimate doesn't hurt my brain because it's a noun and an adjective. But now we have multiply, add, and then the way Tanner was pronouncing it, estimate, which is verb, adjective, and adjectives don't belong with verbs.
So how bad would it be if we just...
an estimation of multiply add.
Right. So with Steve's pronunciation of estimate instead of estimate, then now it's verb, which, yay English.
I mean, how bad is multiply add? Sorry, like, if we just stock comment and be like, could be different on different machines. It's because they don't have. I mean, if presumably if we could make it the same everywhere, we would, right? Like...
Well, no, because so that's the thing is that on some hardware doesn't provide fused multiply add. Some hardware does provide it, but it does change the determinism of the result. And you want to be able to provide multiply add specifically for things like tensor primitives because you're operating on huge scalars on huge arrays of T, and so you don't want to have to break that up into two separate kernels. Multiply add's actually one of those standard kernels that's been provided all the way back to the 60s and 70s with BLAS.
So the fear is
one of the universal primitives of sort.
Right. So to be fair, everyone could do it the same way if you did the slow way, and then you'd have consistent results. But the point is, in some cases, you're fine with it being faster and inconsistent, and you just want to be extra clear, even though people calling multiply add. I mean, presumably they're calling it because they know it might be a fused operation, so like it shouldn't be a huge surprise.
Well, it will never be a fused operation is the thing.
Oh. Well, on some machines or just ever?
No. Multiply add is strictly x times y plus c. We might interleave the two compute kernels, but there will always be two rounding operations as part of it.
Okay.
And we really don't want to be in the business of giving users an API that, especially primitive API, where it starts changing results across your hardware. That just leads to pain in making your training stable. It causes subtle bugs. It means you've tested on x86, you deploy on ARM64, and now all of a sudden you're going down a code path you didn't expect to be going down.
Okay. I think I'm convinced. And I guess it's like so rare that we've only had a few APIs that even have this label so far. So
Yeah, I mean, if we want to say that it's estimate instead of estimate, which I'm happy that Wiktionary agrees with the noun is estimate and the verb is estimate, then sure. But Tanner needs to pronounce it right.
it is really funny though. Like multiply, add, estimate definitely sounds worse, right? Like I know methods shouldn't be nouns, but like
No,
yeah, it's
to me multiply add
grammatically it sounds worse.
multiply add estimate. I'm like add what estimate. If it's multiply add estimated, then I'm like, oh, okay, there's an estimation going on. And if it's multiply add estimate, then it's like, oh, okay, that's verb. Like,
Sure.
so like,
Whatever.
this is not like me being a like picky linguistic thing. This is like my language neural net. When Tanner said multiply add estimate, ground to a I must have heard something wrong. Halt. Like.
All right. Well, as long as it allows us to keep the same convention, which I don't think is that bad, we're good.
So, sure. So how are you going to dim the dim?
The dim will just default to the scalar operation. Because that's of the two, that is the safer from the perspective that you won't end up in a perf trap.
So you, instead of giving people an estimate, you give them the precise result. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. So that's the thing, is that the estimation comes from, of the two algorithms it could pick here, they can differ in a result of one ULP because one is more accurate than the other. But the cost of making it more accurate by doing the fused rounding operation means that you need hardware acceleration. Otherwise, you're pessimizing it to an extremely slow software fallback.
I'm not sure I follow what you're saying. So you're saying like these things rely on intrinsics. So unless you correctly implement them, they're going to be super slow. Is that what you're saying?
Fused multiply add will, yes, but regular multiply add will stay fast because that's just a primitive operation.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is, so regarding, ignoring perf for a second, my understanding based on the method name is that because it has estimate in the name, the result is more fuzzy, for lack of a better term. So you're not getting the precise result. You get like a somewhat off result because you say I value perf more than I value an accurate result. So if you give them the scalar result, does that mean you give them a more precise result than they were asking for? Is that what's happening?
Well, as compared to the fused operation, it will potentially be less precise. But as compared to so it's as compared to doing a fused operation, it's less precise. And then on hardware with fused support, it will be different from doing the scalar operation.
So this can only really be more accurate than like doing normal multiplication and adding of like the doubler float, like one after the other, because you don't have the multiple rounds of rounding, to your point, which is kind of ironic, because it might do the fused operation, which would be more accurate. So really, it's like as accurate as the naive thing or better.
But that's still, see, also excel with the Intel bug of like, well, this formula was slightly wrong, but now we need to emulate that in software for the rest of time.
Yeah, it really means unstable across machines. Like that seems to be the primary concern.
Yeah.
It's always pretty dang accurate. Like I think most people consider multiply and then add like pretty accurate most of the time. Like if you're doing one operation after the other on a double or float.
Yeah, my only concern was if we dim it with a more precise implementation, that people have weird bugs where upgrading will now degrade their accuracy. But it doesn't sound like that's what's happening.
Yeah, well, notably, that's how we dim everything is with the naive implementation. So like reciprocal reciprocal estimate is defaulted as just 1 over x, because that's the only way you can really implement the dim. And then on hardware that supports acceleration, because you've said give me an estimate, it means that we will give you 1 over x however fast we can compute it on that machine. So on one device it might take 1 to 3 cycles and only give you and it might be off by like 20 ULP. But on another machine it might not have that same instruction, and it could take 8 cycles and only be off by 2 ULP. Or on another machine it might take 15 cycles and be off by 0 ULP because it's exact. That's the purpose of the estimate, is to say this may not give you the exact result, and exactly what you're going to get is going to depend on the machine and the hardware capabilities available.
And for
So it
those
becomes a user opt-in.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to tell others because I just looked it up. ULP is unit in the last place. But sorry.
Obviously, you didn't know that?
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me then.
So really, we're putting it on the interface, and then making it explicitly visible on these 3 types, and then doing the consequence. I guess infloat is also explicit exposure, and then these are the multi-value consequence APIs, which is really just showing how broad our mathiness is getting these days.
I'm glad that we added tensors.
We have
already.
Yeah, we've got 3 levels of math: scalars, vectors, tensors. And they are basically a big constructed tower layering on top of each other.
All right, and then X, Y, and add end are the names we want.
Yes, of course.
They're the consistent names.
All right, later.
There we go. All right. So many of our framework design guidelines are public. Things that got added in the 3rd edition, which the 7-bit ASCII names thing was, it's always a rule we've had, we just never wrote it down. It got written down for 3rd edition. There's a bunch of complicated stuff that happens when you have a book publishing deal and are sharing content out, and let's just say everyone thinks we should update them, and both sides' lawyers want some other lawyer to sign a different form than the one that they're willing to sign, and we're just stuck in bureaucracy. Which is a stupid reason, but it is what it is. So no, that explicit guideline is only available in the book. I'm not trying to sell more books, I promise. So, right. So, thanks for joining us, everyone. Do we have a session on Thursday this week?
Yeah, for ARM again. What we said.
Okay. Is that on my calendar but not the published calendar? Yes. Okay, so despite what the calendar says, we will have a session on Thursday at 10 a.m. Redmond time. If so, that'll be more ARM intrinsics, and if intrinsics and such aren't your bag, then we'll see you on the 13th at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel. Ciao.